Okay, so these are some notes for chapter 8. And just to get into these a little bit more, you're going to have some more definitions and some more phrasing and techniques to kind of remember. So when you read through this chapter is focusing on figure and image. So you'll start off with a poem in here that sort of sets the tone here for what we're talking about with figurative language. And when you refer back here, if I look up by Dorian Lau, it's titled Girl in the Doorway. She is 12 now, the door to her room closed, telephone cord trailing the hallway in tight curls. I stand at the dryer, listening through the thin wall between us, her voice rising and falling as she describes her new life. Static flies and brief blue stars from her socks, her hairbrush in the morning. Her silver braces shine inside the velvet case of her mouth. Her grades rise and fall. Her friends call her, they don't. Her dog chews her new shoes to a canvas pulp. Some days she opens her door and musk rises from the long crease in her bed, fills the dim hall. She grabs a denim coat and drags the floor. Dust swirls and gold eddies behind her. She walks through the house, a goddess, each window pulsing with summer. Outside, the boys wait for her teeth to straighten. They have a vibrant patience. When she steps on the front porch, sun shimmies through the tips of her hair, the V of her legs, fan out like wings under her arms as she raises them and waves. Goodbye, goodbye. Then she turns to go, folds up all that light in her arms like a blanket, and takes it with her. So, in Girl in the Doorway, as Kawat talks about, we're going to be looking at figurative language, and this just means using very rich and imaginative figures of speech. So, like tight curls, which, the poet uses to describe the phone cord, but you can also think about the girl. It's a good example of kind of that. We also talk about in writing ambiguity. So that's using a word usually for this technique where it could have lots of different meanings or implications to it. And that's a really important device to kind of also consider and to look at. We talk about metaphor when the poet says she walks to the house a goddess. That's very metaphoric, the beauty, the poise, how we think of different goddesses that we've seen and read about before too. So you can identify a lot of these other examples of very much figurative and imaginative sort of language that go throughout here. Another one, like her silver braces shine inside the velvet case of her mouth. That's really unusual, but also a very good image because you sort of can all very much picture that going through, as well as the intentionality, because when we look at the word choice to describe her, they very much talk about like a phone in her room with door clothes, socks, hairbrush, braces. It's like an American girl that has been going through all these things just like any other girl. So I think it's important where you can see sort of the different patterns, and the word choice plays a big, big difference here. I'll scroll down as well because some of the other factors that you want to think about, color and light play really big, important roles in literature. So how they're used, what they might symbolize is also important to note. We talked a little bit about this last time, but the poem's internal rhyme, especially in the last chapter here, there's a lot of internal rhyme. The first half of the poem has the assonance of door, cord, hall, morning, hall, wall, falling, fall, call. You have the long I sound in several of these words. So that's just something else that you can sort of remember. There's another contemporary poem that you can use effectively with sort of the same figures of speech to kind of read through here. And just breezing through this because I want you to go through and actually read and look at them yourselves too. So find some of those examples. The other areas that you're going to get into great detail are metaphor and common language. So, we call metaphors, sort of that comparison where something, sort of stands for something else when you look very much more deeply at it. And the unconscious comparisons are sort of dead metaphors, meaning that it's used so figuratively but so common that sometimes we don't even recognize it that it is a metaphor. So Different phrases like that. What could something mean? And sort of common language. What, especially I think today, there's a lot of certain phrases that have become more common language too. So you're going to look at some of these examples and read them in here. I will go into more detail in them. Um, Other techniques that you're going to be looking at, the word thwack, twack, an example of onomatopoeia, that's naming something by its sound. So it's an imitation of something being hit or slapped. Onomatopoeia is really fun to say over and over again too. The words boing, clunk, pow, those are all imitations of sound. So we're going to get to that a little bit more later on. When kids call a clock a tick-tock, they're using onomatopoeia. And of course, you might have read haikus or epiphonic images. Haiku is that Japanese poem of only 17 syllables, and you're using one single syllable to kind of go through it. It developed out of an earlier voice, which was called Tanka or Waka, and it's a 31 syllable poem. So we'll definitely be looking really cool. Some of you might have read these pieces before, but we will definitely be looking at some of these forms of poetry, especially the haiku, because it works through like that one single image, that one relationship. And there's some examples that you can look at here, which is really, really beautiful and really important pieces. So I'll be going into a little bit more detail. I also have haiku notes that you can kind of read and follow along with too. So you'll want to go through those and think about those before you get to some of your exercises that are going to be in this book. So you want to keep a very open mind on figurative language, as how it warns. It can help turn in a different poem into a wonderful one, but beware that it doesn't distract or take away from the power of your poem itself. And there are some examples to kind of show that here. So we'll be doing some more different exercises around this, which I think will be really fun. And I think some of your writing pieces will be really kind of good to get into for that as well. So make sure you read this chapter. I know that's a quick verse. We will be, again, this is just meant to sort of skim the surface. We're going to be going into more detail into a lot of these. So don't feel like you have to know deeply. Just, try to identify and write down some sort of shortcuts for yourself when you're going through some of these poems.